Hey everyone, today's episode includes stories that took place in two U.S. national parks, Yosemite and Grand Teton. The events affected the witnesses in ways that they feel they may never recover from, completely changing their lives. To this day, they're trying to make sense of the horror that happened, but resolution has been difficult. So kick up your heels, click that subscribe button, and get comfortable. Great. Now let's get into the stories. My life completely changed, and essentially all came crashing down the year I went hiking and camping at Yosemite. It was late May of 2008, and I was depressed. I had just broken up with my girlfriend and basically felt like I was at the end of my rope. So I decided to go on a road trip from San Francisco all the way to Yosemite National Park, which was essentially a straight shot east. If you've never been there, it's quite literally in the middle of nowhere. There are no cities within miles of it and basically only one main road that leads into and out of it. I arrived about noon on a Saturday and immediately set up camp in the Upper Pines campground. I had all the stuff I needed and I was ready to relax for the next few days before going back home on Monday. The campground was pretty empty, maybe 10 to 15 other campsites were occupied. I started a small fire and began cooking lunch when I noticed some people setting up a tent about 50 yards from me. It wasn't odd since there were plenty of open spots, but it would turn out that this spot would be important later on. As I ate my food, an older couple with 2 dogs then arrived and set up their camp right next to me. They seemed nice enough, so we exchanged pleasantries as they unpacked their stuff. And then after they finished, I watched as they walked over to the trail to start hiking. I then finished eating and decided to take a walk myself. So I walked along the trail for about 10 minutes, taking in the sights when I saw something odd off in the distance. It looked like something standing on top of one of the rock formations that jutted out from the ground. At first, I thought it was just an optical illusion because it was so far away and in a place that would be nearly impossible to get to. But as I continued to look at it, it seemed to be moving closer and further away at the same time. It also looked like whatever it was stood on 2 legs instead of 4 like an animal would. Whatever this thing was disappeared behind another rock formation, reappeared again, and then disappeared completely. This made me incredibly curious, so I decided to speed up my pace towards it. I got closer to it in about 10 minutes and looked towards where I had seen it, but saw nothing. It was at this point that I realized how quiet it was all around me. Usually when you're in nature, you hear birds chirping or the wind blowing through the trees, but it was completely silent here, except for my own breathing. I decided to continue walking down the trail to see if I could find whatever this thing was. So I kept going until the trail ended and opened up into a clearing with another trail branching off. I'm pretty sure I had seen the couple from before going down that way. As soon as I took a few steps onto this new trail, I heard something slam into the ground behind me, like a rock being thrown. I turned around immediately and scanned my surroundings, but didn't see anything out of place. No branches moved or leaves rustled. Nothing was moving. After a few seconds, I decided to keep going to see if whatever it was I had seen before had followed me. I didn't see anything, so I kept walking for about 5 minutes when I came across a small clump of trees growing tightly next to each other. As I stood there wondering how they had come to grow that way, I noticed something on the ground just beyond one of the trees that looked like a stick, but it was white in color, which was really intriguing. So I walked closer to it, and when I got close enough to pick it up, this creature that I can only describe as a monster appeared from behind the tree right next to me. It was tall, at least 8 feet. It had gray skin, black eyes, and no nose. Nothing that you could call a normal mouth either, just an opening where the face met its neck. It also had long fingers with sharp claws instead of hands. Shockingly, the creature was so startled by me that it let out this screeching sound, and then it ran away. I was too shocked to move for about 20 seconds, but when I snapped out of it, I booked it back to the campsite. The old couple from before were just returning from their hike as I arrived back at camp. They asked me if everything was all right because they said I looked like I had seen a ghost. I blurted out all about what happened, and the couple seemed genuinely concerned for me. I'm not sure if they were concerned at that point because they believed me or because they thought I was having some sort of an episode. The husband offered to sit with me for the rest of the night if I wanted him to, but after a while I felt much better, and so we all relaxed and continued about our respective business, just sitting around and relaxing at our sites. And then at around 9:30 at night, we both heard this loud noise of something slamming into one of the trees behind us. It made a noise that even shook the ground, which scared the crap out of everyone. The dog belonging to the couple started barking in the direction of the noise and wouldn't stop, so the husband got up to see what was going on, and there, behind the trees, was that same thing I had seen earlier, and it started throwing rocks at him and his dog. We could even hear them hitting from where we were. The husband ran back to his campsite, and I watched as this thing chased him back, but it continued running towards the trail that we had all been on earlier. I then watched it follow that trail until it reached a bend, and it disappeared into the forest. We never saw it or heard from it again after that. The husband and wife packed up their things instantly, though, said goodbye, and drove off in their car. I stayed the rest of the night by myself, and I didn't sleep a wink. I still don't know why or how I even did that. The next morning I packed up my stuff and left as quickly as possible. Needless to say, I have not been back to Yosemite since then because it completely ruined the experience for me. And no, this thing wasn't a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot or whatever people want to call them. It was something else entirely that almost looked like an alien with gray skin and black eyes. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't normal at all. I've been camping and hiking all over the country, and I've never experienced anything like this. Whatever it was, it wanted us out of that campground, and it did everything in its power to scare us away. Grand Teton National Park holds a secret that I'm not sure many people know about. I mean, it's not really a secret in the sense that you can't find out about it, but more like I'm not sure how many people know of its existence. In one section of the park, there's this small lake, and it's fed by a small stream. The lake isn't very large, and the shoreline is heavily wooded with pine trees. There's also a trail that sort of runs near it, but other than that, it's pretty secluded from the rest of the park. So, I was hiking along this trail in 1992 when this all happened. I was walking along, minding my own business, when I heard something splashing in the water, loudly splashing off to my right. And when I looked over, I saw something that I could not believe. I even took off my sunglasses and put on my regular glasses to see it more clearly. But it was really there. There was a creature in the water, and it was covered in hair, long, shaggy brown hair, and the shape of the thing looked like it was part human and part animal. Obviously, I had never seen anything like it before. The thought even crossed my mind that someone was filming a movie or something. Basically, my brain was trying to rationalize what it could be, but ultimately I was so shocked that all I could do was stand there and stare at it. Fortunately, the creature didn't seem to notice I was there, which made me feel a little bit safer. So soon my emotions turned to being curious, and I wanted to get a closer look. I slowly made my way over to the edge of the lake, being careful not to startle it or let it know I was there. And when I got close enough, I could see that it definitely looked like some kind of large dog, and it had 2 arms and 2 legs that were covered in thick fur. The creature's body was also furry, but the face was hairless. And I could now see that it had 2 large eyes and that they were staring straight at me. I stood there for a few minutes just watching the creature. It was clear that it was not afraid of me one bit, and I wasn't sure what to do about that. Do I stand still? Do I move? Finally, I decided to leave it be and continue on my hike, thinking there had to be some logical explanation for this. So I was walking along when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, came this blood-curdling scream that sounded like it was coming from a human being. It was so loud that it actually made me jump. I stopped for a moment, trying to figure out what it could be, and then a few minutes later came another scream that sent shivers all over my body. And I was actually starting to get scared at this point, but I kept on going because I didn't know what else to do. But then as I rounded a bend in the trail, I saw something that made my heart stop. There in front of me was the creature that I had just seen in the lake. But now it was out of the water, and I could see that it was standing on its 2 legs, and it looked like that's the way it always walked. And it was also covered in something that looked an awful lot like blood. I stood there not knowing what to do when the creature suddenly lunged at me with its sharp claws extended. I screamed and I ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, and then I hid behind a tree just trying to catch my breath. I was so scared I was shaking all over. After a few minutes, I peeked out from behind the tree to see if the creature was still there, but it was totally gone. Thankfully, I made it away safely, and I have never seen that thing again. But ever since that day, I can't help but wonder what it was that I saw. Was it some kind of animal that had never been seen by mankind before? Or was it something else entirely, like a mutant of some kind? And why was it bleeding? I didn't really notice any wounds, but they could have been covered up by fur. I eventually came to think that the reason I saw it was because it was injured, like the way you only see some animals if they're sick or injured and not acting like they normally would. There's no real way that I'll ever know for sure about any of that, but one thing is for sure. That experience left a very lasting impression on me. Well, more than a lasting impression, really. Thoughts of what happened actually consumed me for a few months afterwards, but eventually they started to dissipate, and I eventually got over it. Well, mostly, other than a few nightmares that still tend to creep into my dreams every once in a while. I'm hoping that writing this to you will help me get past those, too. My fingers are crossed. Say a prayer for me if that's something you do. Thank you, everyone. I have a really embarrassing dog, and so far he likes to hump everything. He had been to the vets and had his special operation, so he can't really cause any harm, just embarrassment. And when I say he likes to share love with everything, I do mean everything, not just other dogs. There is nothing this dog won't hump, including tree trunks and other things that he finds in the woods. So you can imagine why walks can be pretty stressful, and why I try and find more remote spots for us to go. And if he takes a liking to a tree trunk, he can have at it without me having to explain to some owner that he's just a lover, but there won't be any puppies. Anyway, I managed to find the spot with a lot of trees and not a lot of people or other dogs. We'd been going there a couple of months, and things were swell for the most part. He could run off, do whatever, and there was literally nobody else about. Some of the shame, at least, appeared to be lifting. Of course, I always knew he'd meet his match. He's a mongrel mix, kind of average size, but maybe like German Shepherd. So big enough to add extra torment when he takes a liking to smaller dogs. We'd always joke that one day he'd try it on with something like a buck and get a good kick in the face. When he came running back to me that day, tail between his legs and whining, and an obvious bite mark on his back, my first thought was that he'd gotten away and gotten into more than he'd bargained for. I was super curious, though, and wanted to go over and see what it was. He was acting really weird, cowering, and I couldn't drag him back into the trees. What I saw next would terrify me. It was on all fours. You would obviously expect that from an animal, but it didn't look right. And then I saw why. Because it came out to stand in front of the trees and then stood up on 2 legs like a man. This animal was covered in fur, similar color to mange. Unlike my dog, though, it looked very comfortable and natural standing on 2 legs. And even the arms were just dangling by the sides like they were meant to be there, not on the floor. A natural human posture coming from any animal is really disturbing. Oh, and by the way, The bite mark on my dog's back that I originally saw was pretty bloody. Whatever bit into him bit in pretty deep. He had to end up going to get stitches, but that's later on. Even this thing's head was similar. It looked kind of like a German shepherd, but its face was somewhat human. And whereas my boy has a dopey expression on his face, this thing just looked mean. Not just the sheer size, but it had a very angry aura around it. Once it saw us, it began baring its teeth and growling. I yelled out, my dog barked, and we ran, and we finally got back to the car. Now, I need to find a new place because I don't want to invest in one of those long, retractable leads and hope my dog doesn't upset any other men's dogs. Or we run into that creature again. That was scary. And while I don't believe in fairy tales or werewolves, I can't deny there aren't things out there that will attract themselves to other animals. Like my dog, for instance. I believe it wanted to turn my dog into dinner, make it its prey.